Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. As you can see for today's webinar, we'll be discussing the ins and outs of software as a service in local government. Thanks to our featured speakers, San Rafael, California Senior Management Analyst Rebecca Woodbury, and Upper Arlington, Ohio Assistant City Manager Dan Rowley. Before we kick things off, let's make a few introductions. My name is Rachel Kieser, and I'm Strategic Initiatives Manager here at Viewpoint Government Solutions. Today's presentation is brought to you in part by Viewpoint Cloud, our flagship workflow management software that enables municipalities and state agencies across the country, like Dan and the forward-thinking team in Upper Arlington, to offer next-generation permitting, licensing, and code enforcement solutions. If you're interested in learning more about our software, please visit viewpointcloud.com. I'm joined today by my co-host, Luke Fretwell, co-founder and CEO of Proud City. Luke, why don't you share a bit about yourself and the work that Proud City does?
Thank you, Rachel. As Rachel mentioned, I'm Luke Fretwell, one of the co-founders and CEO of Proud City. We are a digital government platform and software as a service company that provides a range of government solutions, including secure, accessible, mobile-friendly websites, online forms and payments, and onboarding services. We are fully committed to and passionate about providing cities of all sizes easily adopted, ever-improving technology solutions to best serve their communities, and we are particularly proud to work closely with Rebecca and the entire San Rafael team, who have been both a partner and inspiration for us from the beginning.
Thanks, Luke. So as I mentioned, we're also joined by Rebecca, one of our local government speakers, and Dan Rowley. And both Rebecca and Dan will tell you a bit more about themselves during their presentations. We'll kick things off with Rebecca and then move to Dan's presentation. If at any point during the webinar you have a question, please use the chat function in your webinar panel to submit a question directly to us, and we'll make sure to get those at the end of the presentations during the Q&A session. So thanks again so much for being with us today, and now I will hand things over to Rebecca.
Thanks, Rachel. So actually, we've got a few slides before I get into some things that I'd like Luke to speak to. So actually, Luke's going to kick it off with a few slides, and then I'm going to get into some other topics.
Okay, great. Thank you, Rebecca. So first thing, in the context of software as a service, it really empowers digital, and digital is the new normal. As most of us know, the U.S. Digital Service was founded after healthcare.gov, and they created a playbook and a lot of information around deploying digital, and really emphasize the importance of it. By building digital services that meet their needs, we can make the delivery of our policy and programs more effective. And I think this applies to not only the federal government, but small cities, local towns as well, and probably even more applicable. The next thing about digital is it really changes perception, right? Like, everybody is using iPhones, computers to interact with everything today. It's no longer an in-person physical exchange that's happening, whether it's Amazon or social media. Accenture did a study to sort of analyze the impact of what would happen if government improved its digital services. And as you can see, there's a high percentage of satisfaction and positive perspective on government if their digital services were implemented effectively. Just to kind of get things started with SaaS and explain what SaaS is. SaaS is an acronym for software as a service. Software as a service, it's SaaS as in SASE. It's a software licensing and delivery model in which software is licensed on a subscription basis, and it is centrally hosted. What that means is it's web-based. It's no longer I need to have a server in my basement of City Hall. It is somebody else, the server is somebody else's problem. So you essentially log in and do your work. The person or the company that is providing the software often provides frequent and recurring updates across one central platform. So once that platform is updated, everybody that's using that software receives the benefits of those updates. For example, Proud City, we update every 2 weeks, and all the cities receive those updates at the same time. So what this provides is a scalable approach to delivering services. You know, instead of creating simple bespoke websites or applications, people can, and they're sort of one and done, and the contractor goes away, and then you have to pay that contractor again when you have more money. It really allows every city to receive those benefits all across the board. It's, as I said, it's subscription-based. Typically, there's a monthly or yearly option, and you can typically pay as you go, so you can cancel at any time. A lot of times you'll see also transparency in pricing, so it's not sort of how much is it going to cost me, it's right up front. And as I mentioned, there's centralized hosting in the cloud where you don't have to worry about that hosting, it's someone else's problem. And typically there is a service and support arrangement that you can log in and issue tickets or chat with people. And that is typically included in the service, the subscription. So as mentioned with services and how they differentiate from SaaS, typically service is bespoke custom development. You pay somebody almost like you're building a bridge. You do a heavy RFP and specification process. You budget a large amount of money. You pay the contractor builds the bridge, and you go away, and they go away. And if you need fixes, you pay them a little bit, or if you need a new bridge, you build a new bridge and go through that same process again. Well, technology is not like that. It constantly updates, which is why the SaaS subscription model and the recurring updates are so important. So questions asked, do you really need customized development? Software as a service has evolved, and there are SaaS services for almost anything these days. So the answer to that question a lot of times is no, especially at the enterprise level. Ask yourself, do you have a recurring budget or ongoing customized development? If yes to the above question, you have to ask, will this be maintained internally or by a third party? And if it is internally, do you have great developers, designers, IT managers that can maintain and continually upgrade? If no to this question, you should use SaaS. And I would say, most small cities, the answer to that question is no. So that's it for me. I will turn it back over to you, Rebecca.
Thanks, Luke. Thanks for the nitty-gritty. So my name is Rebecca Woodbury. I am a senior analyst for the city of San Rafael. I've been with the city now for almost 9 years. I started as an intern about 9 years ago. I'm going to talk about some of the non-technical aspects of deploying a SaaS product. Many of you likely work in organizations where people's tech skills, they vary across generations, departments, positions. And in that way, I think some of the non-technical advice and lessons I've learned is quite important when you're setting out to implement new technology with government employees. So I'm going to be talking mostly about our recent endeavor in San Rafael to build out our digital platform with Proud City. And I'm going to run through some of my slides fairly quickly. So in the Q&A, feel free to bring up any areas that you want to dive deeper on. So the first point here, I think, is to appoint a leader. At the outset, it's really important to do this. I've got to figure out how to take over the slides. So this person should be given an appropriate level of authority, autonomy, and support while holding them accountable to the outcomes. Some of you will be lucky enough to have natural positions to fit this role, like a digital or innovation officer, but for others, this person is probably going to be an analyst, a project coordinator, or a product owner. Depending on the product, it might make sense for someone who does your communications to fill this role. So this person doesn't have to have a lot of tech skills. I certainly don't, but they do have to have a certain degree of digital literacy, and they need to be strong project managers. So depending on your organizational readiness and culture, buy-in is really important to gauge up front. Otherwise, your efforts could dive bomb fairly quickly. I spent years convincing leadership of certain new tech tools that we need. So it can take time. It's equally important, though, to get buy-in from your elected officials and management, as well as staff from all levels of your organization. Staff who are resistant to changing the way they're doing things or feel as if you don't understand their needs, they can block or slow your implementation very easily. Focusing on council and departmental goals related to things like community engagement or service delivery improvements, modernization efforts, this can help people kind of see the bigger picture and kind of paint the picture for the needs. And remember here that technology is one aspect, but how and if people are going to use it is really key. And this takes time and energy to bring people around. So something that I found very helpful at the outset of actually the procurement effort, and then again during implementation, is to set guiding principles for yourself. Procurement can be daunting, and sales pitches all start to sound the same. So I found that honing in on the qualities that we were looking for, not just in a vendor, but actually in ourselves, we were able to create a kind of criteria that was more meaningful than, say, the number of years a vendor was in business. We used this criteria during our evaluation process, and it really helped differentiate vendors that were kind of hard to differentiate when it came to other metrics. So when it comes to procurement, simplify as much as you can. Traditional procurement efforts, they are, I find, painful for everyone on all sides of the transaction, from the actual writing of the RFP or RFI to how you evaluate them. Just be careful not to be overly prescriptive at the outset and choose your evaluation team wisely. It's important to know what your goals are, but to be flexible and open as to how you're going to get there. Always ask to test drive the product so you know firsthand how user-friendly it is and whether you will enjoy using it. Don't take a sales team's word for it. Build a team. The team you need is obviously highly dependent on who will be using your product. So whether or not this is internal users within a division or department, or if it's going to be used across the organization. You want your team to be diverse but cohesive. Give people autonomy and support while balancing that with focusing them on the end game and bringing them together through kind of standards and guidelines. A key part before rolling this out to all your users is also preparing your team, the team that's worked on this, preparing them for potential criticism. With our website, I think we faced more internal criticism from our own kind of colleagues than we did when we actually rolled it out to the public. And that can be really difficult for some of the people on your team to hear after they've been working really hard on something. So I think that's something not to forget. It seems obvious, but it's really easy for us to get wrapped up in the way that we view our services and how deeply ingrained we get in our operations. So we quickly lose sight of what our community members experience. Focusing on, helping people accomplish tasks and transactions and less on the branding and the fluff. My view is less is more, and that although some people may be visiting your website to learn who the mayor is, most are just going to want to know if the pool is open and how do they get a business license. So setting up ways for you to get kind of continual feedback, understanding your analytics, and just keep improving the experience for everyone, including your internal staff users. So your analytics are definitely going to show you how important mobile-first thinking is. For example, in San Rafael, I think almost 40% of our website visitors are on mobile or tablets. And this percentage is growing. My take on standalone apps is just a no. I don't know about you, but I'm probably not going to download your app. In terms of beta, testing out your idea and your solution, this is just, I I think, a total must. You can either test on a small or a large group using things like online surveys or in-person interviews. Before launching our site, we had a beta version, and we actually brought a bunch of laptops down to a local bar, and we just gave people free beer if they tested out our new site. And in those 2 hours, we got some of the best feedback on our beta version. So not only does this help you see what's working and what's not, but it also just helps with the rollout overall, because people, both internal and external, get used to the change. And it also increases your engagement with your users. And I think one of the hidden benefits is it really lowers the stress of finally flipping the switch on your new product. Having trouble getting to the next slide. So periodic updates also, this helps others see what's happening, and it also helps you feel the progress that you're making. I used a simple done doing bulleted list each week, and it helped me document our progress. So again, this was a way for me to keep other people apprised as to the weekly progress that we're making. But more than that, it was helpful for me to be able to reflect on the progress. Sometimes it may at times feel like you're not getting a lot done, but then when you go through this exercise, you really do realize how much you've accomplished. Analyzing is really a continuous task in your implementation and your rollout. And I recommend looking for products that either have a built-in analytics tool or that allow you to integrate with others. If you don't analyze, you won't learn. So whatever you're doing is probably just going to deteriorate over time, no matter how awesome it is to start. And lastly, we've got a couple slides on just this notion of defaulting to open. I have to defer to Luke to talk about kind of the power of open source on the technology side. But something that we've always tried to embrace as a government agency is just an open approach to information sharing and our overall culture. One of the things that we've been building is essentially an open intranet for our employees. So this is a publicly accessible website. It's not password protected, but the audience is our own employees. This is a place where people can find information about our policies and procedures, how to refer calls, technology self-help, new hire info, just a lot of information that would normally live on an intranet site. But as a public agency, none of this information is proprietary or confidential. Our employee book club just recently read a book called The Open Organization, and we had an engaging conversation about how the culture of an open source technology company really relates closely to that of a government agency. And I'll end my remarks today with a quote that both Luke and I like from this book, and we also highly recommend you all read. An open organization, which I define as an organization that engages participative communities both inside and out, responds to opportunities more quickly, has access to resources and talent outside the organization, and inspires, motivates, and empowers people at all levels to act with accountability. The beauty of an open organization is that it's not about pedaling harder, but about tapping into new sources of power both inside and outside to keep pace with all the fast-moving changes in your environment. So with that, I'll pass the baton to Dan's portion of today's webinar, and look forward to any questions in the Q&A.
Great. Thanks so much, Rebecca, for sharing what your team has learned going through that process. For our audience members, don't worry if you missed something. I know we're kind of covering a lot. We'll be sending out a recording after the webinar. And if you have questions at any time, don't forget to submit them into our chat box. So now I will hand things over to Dan.
Hi everyone, my name is Dan Rowley and I serve as the Assistant City Manager in Upper Arlington, and as part of that role I oversee our Community Development Department. I'm going to speak today about our experience going through the selection of a new permitting software. The Community Development Department in Upper Arlington processes about 3,500 permits annually and is doing about $100 million in permitting. We're a community of 34,000 residents, largely residential in nature. and we're fully built out. Probably relevant to our discussion today is that in a previous life, prior to entering service in local government, at the height of the dot-com boom, I was involved in IT myself, working for Lewis and Clark College out in Portland, Oregon for a number of years. I wanted to talk about two different things today. The first is not all clouds are the same, and by that I don't mean service level agreements and uptimes and all of that, but that there's a functional difference between companies and software vendors that are doing exclusively software as a service, that is, they really only have one version of their software, and companies that are traditional client-server companies that have also added on an online or cloud-based version of their software. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a few minutes. Secondly, and this is coming out of our experience here in implementing Viewpoint Cloud, there is a dramatic increase in efficiency and customer service that's possible when an organization is able to turn completely to utilizing a web form for the intake of information. And Upper Arlington's probably like a lot of local governments. We're taking in not only development permits, but a variety of other applications, the parade permits, the block party permits, solicitation permits. And what we found was that by putting all of those things online in a single location, that we saw real jumps in efficiency in terms of how we were able to process those pieces of information. And we really improved customer service as part of that. I do not seem to have control of the screen here. Oh, there we go. So just by way of background, we were on a client-server software package. In fact, we're just kind of phasing out of this at the end of our implementation cycle. And that company was one that had a variety of different software packages. I kind of talk about it as the El Camino of software, right? You get this enterprise software that does finance related activities really, really well, and then their customers demand a variety of other functionality like HR, in this case permitting, asset management, and like the El Camino, it can't quite decide which one it does really, really well. Is it a car or a truck? And we felt internally as though we were kind of the tail end of that operation, that the permitting software itself was not serving our needs very well, and it wasn't serving our customers' needs very well. And so what we decided we needed to do was to find a package that would really encourage customers to do online submissions to allow us to spend most of our time with the processing of those applications, not necessarily data entry. Secondly, we really care a lot about the customer experience, and really that's from two sides. Our internal employees were complaining a lot about the user interface of the software that they were utilizing, which candidly looks a lot like a database on the back end. I think many of us have probably seen this kind of software that has 16 tabs across the top. It has a whole bunch of checkboxes that were added on over time by the vendor, and we were really using about 25% of that functionality. And our employees were having to navigate through pages of things in order to complete a permit application. We just found that whole process very inefficient. And then thirdly, we were struggling with how to do in-field reporting. So we have building inspectors who are going out in the field, and we're still in some cases using those old triplicate forms that some of us probably love to hate to report building inspection results, and we would really struggle to securely access that traditional client-server software out in the field. In fact, our vendor in this case was struggling to develop a mobile app and really wanted to charge us a pretty high price to be able to do that. So I spoke about this a moment ago, but I just wanted to reiterate what we found in our selection process were really two different kinds of software vendors. One that was a traditional client-server model, and by that I mean runs on a mainframe. Typically the licensing is per seat or per concurrent user. And those software packages oftentimes are very robust. They have been developed over years and years, and those vendors are well known in the industry. But they have these shortcomings. One of them is that they're a little bit slow to address new features that need to be added. Secondly, it's hard in many cases to access this information out in the field from a location out in your community. And that was really important to us. And in fact, if you look at it more carefully, many of those vendors now provide mobile applications or some sort of mobile option, but it's a little bit of a handicap sort of display of the information that's really on the mainframe. And then I would argue that those companies, because they're having to support multiple versions of their software. I can remember going to one user conference where the question was asked, and maybe some of you on this webinar have seen something similar. How many of our users are still using the AS400 version of the software? And a couple hands go up. And what scares me about that kind of environment is that, of course, those users should be on a more recent version of the software, but the companies are having to support those users at some level. And of course, it's not the A team that's having to do that. And as a result, their resources are really spread out across a variety of different software versions and different kinds of customers. And what you see in the SaaS environment is that there's just a single software package that's offered, and as a result, resources are able to be focused on that single version of software. And I would argue that it makes those companies much more nimble in addressing customer feedback and ongoing software development. So why is the cloud such a game changer for us? It's obviously a buzzword in private sector. I think that we're starting to see a real impact within the government sector and software that's available. And you're seeing this from a variety of different vendors now that are offering web-based software packages that are really doing some interesting things meeting government needs. Well, implementation time was greatly reduced. I would tell you that we had our first permit live and operational within 30 days of when we signed the contract. Our IT department is great, but that implementation, when you're setting up in a client-server model, typically is much, much longer than 30 days. It's lower risk. You're typically signing a one-year contract. There are vendors, of course, or implementation processes that could go awry in software. And candidly, at the lower cost that most of the software service vendors are providing services at, in a one-year contract, you have a pretty low risk in terms of how that implementation happens and what the long-term impacts are on the organization if something doesn't go right. And then because there's a single version, updates are flowing typically from these vendors on a pretty steady clip, and you're seeing real responsiveness to what customer feedback is being given to them by their customers. Obviously, the maintenance responsibility for a hosted environment is the vendors, not your IT departments. So you're not going through these discussions every time there's an update about when that's going to roll out. The IT department's not having to kind of shut down the system after 5 o'clock and do that for people. And as a result, there's a very robust kind of nimble technology environment that I think that's emerging across the country that's responding to many of our needs. So I would argue to you that you need to choose the software very carefully, similar to what Rachel talked about, or Rebecca talked about. We went through a very extensive sandbox environment testing period. And I would argue to everybody on the line that that's something that you should build into your selection process, that particularly with SaaS software options, it's possible for them to provide an environment where you can test the software for a period of time. And we actually did that for a couple of months. And I would tell you that that was key in making our final selection between the final 2 or 3 vendors that we were looking at. Secondly, I think we talked to probably a dozen, maybe more different municipalities that were using the different software packages that we were seriously considering at the end of the day. The SaaS licensing model is one that also had a lot of appeal to us. In this case, Viewpoint Cloud is using a model that actually charges per permit rather than per seat or per concurrent user. And that has a dramatic impact, as it turns out, on how we're able to use the software. So we have a variety of different departments that are processing permits. In some cases, those are remote departments at satellite locations. And what we found was that within the traditional client-server environment, there was always this question of whether or not the volume of those permit applications warranted the cost of an additional license for the user. So in these really low-volume permit situations or low-volume usage situations, the license was expensive enough that there was some evaluation that was done before even granting somebody access. Well, now that the licensing scheme is actually per permit, and it's done, of course, within a band of volume, it's no longer the case that we really care where all of those users are that are accessing the system. We've been able to give accounts out to a variety of different people and, more importantly, move a variety of different ancillary permits into a common system, and that's really had a positive impact on our customer service, having all of those in one location, and then a positive internal impact in that we're able to kind of see and ask questions about different permits. Really, internal communication has benefited as part of that. So this is a screenshot of the Upper Arlington dashboard. And I just wanted to point this out because our group went through a variety of Lean Sigma exercises. Maybe some others on the line have done similar sorts of things. But one of the questions that we always asked as part of those exercises was, how does the customer even know which permit to choose? We tend to give these things really difficult to understand titles, so that if somebody is coming to us for the first time, it would be very difficult to navigate which permit is in fact what they need, or which permits. Sometimes it's more than one. And what Viewpoint has done is to assemble all these into a common dashboard. If you were to scroll down the screen, we've got a variety of categories. But I would tell you even more importantly is on the next screen, you would see a description underneath each of the permit types that are there with a sentence or two about what they do and why they're used. What you're seeing here is a screenshot of the back end, and one of the things that we really honed in on as part of our selection process was this kind of idea of user experience and user interface, and that those things in fact were important criteria for our selection. I would tell you in all candor that it was driven probably more by our internal users who were tired of looking at these kind of database screens that they had been working on for a number of years. But it has turned out to be incredibly important for our customer base, all of the contractors that we service and residents that we service in the community. And that ease of use has really allowed people and encouraged people to submit applications to us online. And that in turn is driving a real jump in efficiency for us internally. What's great about Viewpoint Cloud is that even though this is a screenshot at the back end, the front end looks very, very similar. In fact, in most cases, the back end and the front end are exactly the same. I'd also sort of highlight that over on the right-hand side where you see under current status, again, sort of a Lean Sigma concept, but this idea of visual feedback. Not only sort of telling people where they are in the process, and there's some textual references to that with each record type and application, but you can see very quickly where you are in the review process if you're a customer. If you think about that kind of cycle of what many employees are going through with the phone calls, from customers asking where they are in the review process, you're wanting to spend more time on the review process itself. And the phone calls, in fact, in some ways, limit your time for a review. Well, what Viewpoint does very well is to try and present all of this information to customers in a very easy to understand way. And this visual feedback is part of that. The ability to dialogue directly with customers through the product and ask simple questions also has turned out to be extremely helpful. So Agile is obviously a bit of a buzzword in the industry right now, but from my standpoint, here's what it means for us. That the vendor truly sees their customer as a partner, and in our case, that we as a municipality see our customers, the contractors and residents, as partners where we can get good feedback about how to make processes better and improve the customer experience. What it really meant in practice, though, was that we were able to give meaningful feedback to Viewpoint Cloud as part of the implementation process, and that we have already seen some of these things changed in the product itself. They've been extremely responsive to improving the product, and because they only have the single code base, they're able to do that very, very quickly. As an example of that, Viewpoint is getting ready to roll out version 3 of their product here later this summer. We're really excited about some of the upgrades that are coming with this. Viewpoint has about a 20-year track record in permitting, but this cloud-based version of their product is something that they went all in on, I think, about 4 years ago. And as a result, the development cycle is still very robust, very active, and we're seeing significant feature changes and improvements happen on a very regular basis, really on the order of every other month or so. This is something we're particularly excited about, and if you think about what probably drives a lot of us in local government, it's looking at the analytics. Talked a little bit about the analytics of the website. Rebecca mentioned that in her presentation. But what I care about, in addition to the quality of the service, is how quickly are we, in fact, turning some of these things around. When a permit takes 3 or 4 weeks to process, it rarely is 3 to 4 weeks of actual work. And so what Viewpoint is rolling out here is an example of the analytics that they can provide, which is how long did these things really take to complete? And in fact, where were they completed? Where was the workload actually being done? And so we're pretty excited about being able to see that visually and to be able to show that to employees on a regular basis. So a couple of significant takeaways for us. As I mentioned, I think there's a very significant difference between a software vendor that has a cloud-based version and a software vendor that is exclusively cloud-based or software as a service based. Those that are exclusively cloud-based have a huge advantage in terms of the amount of expense that they have on, behind the scenes in maintaining their product and rolling out feature improvements. Secondly, those feature improvements can occur very, very quickly because they only have a single code base. They're able to do those things in a really efficient manner. And then thirdly, I just wanted to sort of reiterate, and we underestimated this going into our own implementation cycle, that Webforms can drive huge increases in efficiency. And what I mean by that is that Webforms have controls that can mandate that customers fill in those fields. They, of course, can determine whether or not that's alphanumeric or numeric, lots of different things. But if you're able to reduce sources of error in the initial submission of permits and records like that, you're able to really get things right the first time. And when that submission happens, not only digitally, you've got control over how customers enter that information, but the back end is tied to it, and you're doing the processing there in the back end. You can, as an organization, really start to see efficiencies internally. And really what that allows staff to do is to focus in on what they really want to do, which is to offer expertise about processing the applications that customers have submitted. not necessarily fixing individual fields. And then finally, I would argue that the user interface and user experience for your customers and your internal users matter a lot. It helped us internally in terms of buy-in. I think it's helped us internally in terms of being able to train new employees. And for our customers, we've heard lots of positive feedback about how easy the system is to use. And in turn, we've seen rates of online submissions really increase. So I really want to thank everyone on the line today for your participation. And with that, I'm going to turn it over for questions.
Great. Thank you so much, Dan, for sharing your experience and knowledge with us. As you said, we're going to move to question and answer period. As you're listening or as you're hearing questions answered, feel free to submit more in the chat box. But we'll start off, and Rebecca or Dan, both of you guys can jump in here. How can you select software, cloud-based software, based on your agency size, especially for people that might be new to buying cloud-based software? How does that really factor in?
Rebecca, you want to jump in?
Sorry, I missed a couple of the words in that question, so could you repeat it? I'm sorry.
How should you factor in the size of your agency or department when you're selecting software?
The size of the agency. Well, as a small city, we are, I guess we're a little larger than Upper Arlington. We are about 60,000. I'm finding software products that have kind of pricing options that are attractive to smaller cities. So whether it's population based or so that's a great factor when SaaS kind of combines with a good pricing for smaller cities. And I think it comes down to the fact that small cities have small budgets, and we don't need a lot of times we think we need these really customized, made-to-order software products, and we really don't. Oftentimes we'll roll something out, and I think it was mentioned earlier by Dan about using a percentage of the functionality that's really there. And I found that some of our legacy products that we're using now, we really staff don't use hardly. They're using maybe 50% of what that software can actually do. Yet we're paying for all these different modules because they sounded good. So I'm a fan of finding out what we really need, what are our goals, and some of these SaaS products, they meet 90% of our goals, and the 10% that they don't meet, we probably don't really need anyway. We just think we do. So, yeah, I'm not sure if that kind of answers your question around, or what you were kind of getting at.
I think it's a great answer, Rebecca. That one of the things that makes me kind of cringe when I read news about local governments is when there's a kind of six-figure software contract that's being let. That just for small to medium-sized cities, I think in the year 2017, there are very few situations where a large enterprise software solution is in fact the best solution. That there are lots of different options. There are companies across the globe that are using hosted solutions for their own products, and really mission-critical products. We see the benefit of having multiple data centers, multiple places where this is hosted from. And so I didn't really have any worries about going to software that was hosted in the cloud for us. The other thing that I guess you sort of mentioned was that it invites this discussion about what are our internal processes, and as Rebecca mentioned, what are those things that we really, really need in the software? There's a tendency to have kind of mission creep and say, well, it would be really great if it did X, Y, Z. Well, is that absolutely critical to how we do our jobs? And in many cases, that kind of exploratory discussion led us to a completely different endpoint than where we started. That, this question of the 5 whys, asking why 5 times to figure out why something occurs the way that it does, and why a single person or organization does it that way. That really ends in some really interesting results. And I think the ability to be a little bit nimble internally as well, so that you're able to adapt organizationally to the software a little bit, is very, very helpful. In fact, can improve efficiency quite a bit for the organization.
Yeah, just really quick, as you kind of were going through, I was thinking about, when we started our procurement process, I started out with a more kind of traditional mindset, and I interviewed all of our departments and made this, and through those interviews created this really long list of requirements that departments said they wanted or needed, in a new website. And after I kind of completed this really long list, I looked at it and I thought, oh my gosh, as I read through it, I got, this website is going to be horrible if we did all this. And so what I ended up doing was turning that into kind of an appendix to the RFI, but I changed it from a list of requirements to just a list of ideas, things that we may be interested in having that functionality. But I really kind of flipped it from being a long list of hard requirements for the new platform to just a list of ideas. And I think that freed us up and created a lot more flexibility. And it also kind of, I wasn't asking, the people that I was interviewing are public servants. They're not technology professionals or experts in any way, shape, or form. So they may think they want some scrolling banner that blinks for a calendar. But, in actuality, there's a lot of reasons why we don't want that.
Building off of that a little bit, Rebecca, can you talk about, so on your analyze portion of your presentation, you talked about aligning objectives with metrics. Can you talk a little bit about what metrics you selected in rolling out this new digital platform and why?
So are you talking about the analytics on our website?
Exactly, yes.
Yeah. Yeah, actually Proud City helped us out greatly. I had not really, I had Google Analytics set up on our old site, but I was kind of fumbling my way through it. But we were looking at pretty basic things like, how many site visitors are we getting, like looking at our bounce rate. We are, so now what we're doing is we're focusing on unique site visits, we're focusing on bounce rates, we're looking at the key pages that, the most popular pages that people are going to. We're looking at what people are searching for, and that's kind of guiding us to what are people looking for, what are people finding quickly. And there's also a feature that Proud City introduced where people can mark if a page is helpful. And that's been really neat to see which pages people are marking as helpful, because it means that, going back to that page, looking at it, how did we structure the content? How did we word things? What's working with this page that people are finding so helpful? That's also something that's good to look at. And what we're also finding is, throughout the year, different things are important to the community. So in the winter, when business licenses are due, there's a lot of traffic to our site for business licenses. And so we want to make that really easily available on, the home page. So we're looking at kind of seasonally, what are the important things that we want people to be able to find quickly. In the summertime, it's whether the pool is open. So yeah, those are some of the key things we're looking at.
Great, thank you so much. And for anybody listening that doesn't know bounce rate, could you just quickly define bounce rate?
Oh, bounce rate is how long is it? Gosh, can Luke jump in and describe it? It's how quickly people are like coming to a site and immediately leaving and not traveling through your site, right?
So what percentage are leaving after just visiting one page?
I don't know off the top of my head. I'd have to look that up.
Okay, well, let's move on to our last question, and I think this is relevant to both Dan and Rebecca. So for a lot of people listening, they might be in departments or in communities where there's, the organizational culture doesn't really support the adoption of modern tools. People don't want to change. So how do you overcome that? And what did you guys both do in your respective cities to get people on board and motivated?
I'm happy to go first. I think in our case, we had a group of employees that was dissatisfied with the software that they were using. So we had a built-in advantage to really having a motivated group of people wanting to look for other solutions. And those solutions, because of the difficulties that we were having, really pointed toward kind of ease of use and simplicity. And so that really kind of drove our decision-making process. But I would argue, and I don't know if Rebecca's experience is similar to this, that to a certain extent you have to be leaders in your organization and push a little bit. That it's very easy to look at the status quo and say that it's fine. But if you're not meeting your customer needs or expectations, and I would argue with the year 2017, those expectations are very different than they were in 2007 or 1997. Then you're not doing your job. The world is changing, and you may have to push a little bit internally to define what the need is or define what the problem is. I think in our case we had a group of users that internally were looking for a change, but the broader discussion about how we were servicing our customers and how we oriented our processes to serve our customers, I think is one that takes a little bit of a leader within the organization to spearhead.
Absolutely, and I would echo, I think what we're trying to do now in our organization is really build kind of that leadership throughout the different levels of the organization. I think with our website, I would say there is a pretty strong consensus that the previous website was outdated and needed to go. And so with the website project, there wasn't the same type of resistance that I think we've encountered in some of our other technology changes. I think that some lessons that I've learned over time is really taking the time to listen to your internal users about their pain points and really taking the time to kind of understand their perspective. And because there are some that really don't believe that we need to change course in some ways, and so it's taking the time to kind of go over the why with them, and to also kind of make them a part of it and involve them in a way where they don't feel like it's just some top-down decision that's been made, but bring them into the implementation of it and really just continually listen to their needs and try to address that. What we're working on right now is actually we're working on a sort of a citywide initiative around how do we prepare our whole organization for change and kind of with an eye on digital. And it means that there are a lot of folks in your organization that are frustrated, want to be using different tools. And then there are those that are comfortable with the tools. They know how to use them. They've been using them for a long time, and frankly are not interested in using something different. So you've got some tension there that you have to address in a really thoughtful manner. So we're kind of embarking on this initiative right now about kind of what is our organizational readiness for change. Some things that we're encountering is kind of system fatigue, like, oh, I just had to learn this new system. Now you're telling me I'm going to have to learn this other new system. And so we're trying to be mindful about the pace in which we roll out new systems for people to use, and just be really mindful about, what are our priorities and how do we do things in a way that's really thoughtful to where people are at in terms of how comfortable they are with different technology.
Wonderful, really phenomenal stuff. Thank you both, Dan and Rebecca, for sharing your knowledge, your insights, your experience with us today. We've covered a wide range of SaaS topics on this webinar, so for those of you who'd like to review any portion or share with others, we will be sending out the recording in the coming days. We here at Viewpoint and Proud City are grateful to be your hosts today. If you're interested in learning more about Proud City or Viewpoint, or even just have follow-up questions for Dan and Rebecca, please feel free to reach out to Luke or I. Our emails are on the slide. Both speakers and panelists are walking away having learned something new. I'm sure we had a blast today, and we're really looking forward to the next one. Thank you everyone for joining us, and have a great rest of your week.